When you begin gathering ERP requirements, especially in systems like Odoo, your first job isn't to ask technical questions. Your first job is to let the user speak. Sit down with them and say, "Tell me how you work." You'll be surprised how much you learn. Write down their story exactly as they explain it. This user story will give you deep insight into their job role, their pain points, and how their current process flows. And trust me, most of your actual requirements will already be hidden in their words. Now, once you have that user story written down, the next step is to identify what business process it's referring to. For example, if a user says, "I create a quotation, then get it approved from my manager, and finally confirm the order," then clearly this is part of the sales process. Every story you hear needs to be matched to a business process, like sales order, purchase workflow, inventory movement, etc. This helps in structuring your documentation and later, in module mapping. Because when implementation starts, you'll know exactly which requirement belongs to which workflow. Once you identify the business process, you need to dive into its flow, meaning, what happens before and what happens after. For example, let's say we are working with a sales order process. Ask the user, before the sales order, does a quotation come first? Is it linked to a sales lead? And once the sales order is confirmed, what's next? Delivery order, invoice, payment? Mapping out this flow is very important because ERP systems work best when things are linked logically. And it also helps the client clearly visualize the step-by-step progression. This makes sure nothing important is missed and the process is connected from end to end. After understanding the flow, now comes a very critical part, approvals. Every business process has some level of control. Who can approve what? Which step needs authorization? Let's say the sales order must be approved by the sales manager before it's confirmed. Or perhaps a quotation must go through finance before it's sent to the client. Sometimes, you might even find dual-layer approvals, first by the sales head, then by the director. These approval rules need to be defined clearly. Why? Because ERP systems automate this logic, sending alerts, updating document status, and restricting further actions until approval is granted. And if you don't define this properly at the start, users either bypass critical checkpoints or get stuck due to missing configurations. So approvals aren't just controls, they're the backbone of workflow discipline. Now that approvals are set, it's time to understand what actions are performed on the document itself. Let's take sales order as an example again. Once it's confirmed, what should happen? Should the system automatically generate a delivery order? Should it email a confirmation to the client? Should a down payment invoice be created? Do they need a WhatsApp or SMS notification? Does the sales order trigger a purchase request if stock is short? These are called system actions, real-time operations triggered by a document. And ERP systems like Odoo can handle them easily, but only if you've clearly defined them. So don't just ask what the document does, ask what the user does after the document is submitted. That's how you catch automation needs and reduce manual effort. Now let's talk about field-level requirements. This is where most people get lazy, but it's one of the most important parts of gathering configuration data. Every document has fields, and not all of them are required for every business. You need to sit with the user and ask, what inputs do you fill while entering a sales order? Which fields are mandatory? Which ones are optional? Which fields should be hidden from certain users? For example, is the delivery date always required? If yes, then mark it as mandatory in the system. Should the discount field be visible to everyone, or only to managers? This is where you define the user experience. If you make too many fields mandatory, users get annoyed. If you leave everything optional, you lose control. So you need a clear balance, based on business needs, user roles, and process design. A well-documented field map becomes the foundation for ERP configuration and custom development. It defines what the user sees, what they must enter, and what should stay invisible. Let's move on to something every client eventually asks for, reports in print formats. The biggest mistake? Leaving this part for the end of the project. Ask early, what reports do you need? Daily, weekly, monthly? Do you need product-wise sales reports? Region-wise performance? Do you want printed sales orders with the company logo, barcode, or signature section? Clients often have very specific expectations, and unless you define these early, they become last-minute blockers. Print formats are not just about layout, they reflect the company's brand and legal needs. Reporting is not just about data, it's how management runs their business. So document these requirements properly from the start. It'll save you stress, time, and costly rework later. Now let's talk about roles and access rights, something that directly affects both security and productivity. Every user in the ERP should only have access to what they need to see and do. A salesperson shouldn't be able to see journal entries. An accountant doesn't need access to inventory movement. A warehouse user shouldn't be able to modify pricing. When gathering requirements, ask, who should be able to view the screen? Who should have edit access? Who should be restricted? ERP systems let you define roles and assign rights based on menus, fields, records, and even workflow stages. Doing this right not only protects your data, it makes the user interface cleaner, faster, and more focused for every role. Now, let's address a very real situation. When the client says, we don't know what we need, this is where discovery sessions come in. In a discovery session, you don't start by asking questions. You start by showing them the system. Open up Odoo and walk them through the standard flow, create a lead, generate a quotation, confirm a sales order, show delivery and invoice flows. Show dashboards. Show reports. Let them see how the ERP works, and you'll see something magical happen. They'll start saying things like, yes, we also need this step, or, actually, we don't do this part, can we skip it? Or, can we also send this by WhatsApp? That's what discovery does, it creates awareness. It's not a replacement for requirement gathering, but it's a helper step. Especially for first-time ERP users, it opens their eyes to possibilities and helps them articulate their needs. And finally, there comes a moment in almost every project where the client requests something that's simply not possible in the standard ERP. Maybe they want to pull data from an external courier tracking system, or generate a report that Odoo filters can't support, or integrate WhatsApp messaging. Or maybe their approval process is too complex for standard workflows. This is where you pause and say, this is not a standard feature, this will need custom development. Don't just say it, document it. Write down the full business logic. Explain what the user expects. Define who will use it, and where it fits in the process. This becomes a separate development requirement, which goes to the technical team. They will then check feasibility, estimate cost, and plan the custom work accordingly. Never ignore or delay this step. Many ERP projects fail not because of big problems, but because custom items weren't handled properly, or expectations weren't aligned. Custom requests are real, and they need to be clearly documented, planned, and delivered like any other part of the system. Now that you've seen how to gather ERP requirements step by step, from user stories, to process flows, to approvals, actions, fields, reports, access rights,